Okay, good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, May 21st, 2025, and we're here for the May meeting of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the School District of the Guilderland Central School District. Could everyone join me in the, I think I need a motion to call the meeting to order. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Tamika. And if everyone could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for being here. I understand what May is like. So we'll jump right in. And we had, I think, a committee of the whole when the subcommittees met last. So we'll start with our subcommittee report. And I'm not sure who was taking that one to start. Is that you, Derek?
Yes, that's probably me. One of the things we talked about in particular, our last couple of subcommittee meetings have been unified. The students have met on their own in their subcommittee, but the other three committees have met together. And a lot of what we discussed was, as we're closing out the year, how we can consistently shape our message to district stakeholders, and how we can manage recruiting our own members of our own committee, and how we need to do that. And there were a lot of different suggestions that were brought out. A lot of it revolved around supporting student initiatives that were going on. But the other part was finding ways to get involved in the community and to be more of a proactive force in bringing people together. There was a mention of a lot of community activities that maybe we can do, as well as more fun things that would help bring people together, like picnics with food and games, book tastings, movie nights, and family fun nights, Gittleland Night Out, and different things that we can use to create this atmosphere of inclusion and make sure that people felt included. And maybe that would be a good springboard to talk about some of the other issues that are challenging in our community, and give us a sort of a more fertile ground to develop more safe spaces to have these conversations. So a lot of our time was spent really talking and parsing out those issues and figuring out how we need to strategize for next year.
Questions for Derek? So, Derek, there's a probably one more set of subcommittee meetings. Do you envision them also for the non-student group ones? Do you see that last one also being kind of a meeting of the whole?
Yes. Depending on our participation, we've had some waning participation, which left our group kind of small. And when we have a small group, I think it's easier to come together and talk about that. We're still trying to really tackle head on what are some of the ways that we can address to get more out of the activity in our group and the time together, especially at the district level. So I really want to explore that with the people who have been our diehards and have stuck on, stick and stayed with us, and really delve into that feedback.
All right. All right, then. So I'm going to, what about our student voice committees? I know they've been busy.
Yes, we have members from would anyone want to speak on behalf of the junior high student initiatives, or the middle school initiatives, I should?
Yeah, sure. So in the middle school, we haven't had any meetings yet. If I'm going to be completely honest, I feel like the meetings and the scheduling and the planning has slowed down since it's the end of the year and everything's getting really busy and all the students are busy. But all the students are individually working on our assignments and we're hoping to come together again at the end of the year.
Anika, we love perfectly honest. We all need to be perfectly honest. So good for you. It's the
Yeah.
reality of May, June.
Yeah, each of the student groups have identified initiatives that they have focused on this year. With the middle school, it was the video initiative. There's another initiative for the deaf and hard of hearing students that they wanted to collaborate with and do something to, which was really cool. They're trying to put together sort of like a handbook of phrases or things that people can learn to would be a resource for teachers and students to be able to communicate with students who are deaf and hard of hearing so that they could um, interact with them more fully in the room and integrate them. So really, I was watching them try and put that together and work on the suggestions, and the work is moving ahead. And they just want to consult with that community to make sure that that program is something that will get off the ground. And we did have students present about bringing fidgets and different things into the classroom to help students in that fashion. They're looking for funding for that, and I think they approached and made a presentation to the PTA. So they've been active this year, and I think they've settled into their roles, and now I think we're gearing up for next year in that respect. So the middle school has been very active, and the high school's definitely um, been active in different ways. So there are 3 initiatives at the high school. Um, One is a DEI video. The other is the anti-hate rally, which is also spearheaded by our senior class, 3 of our seniors who are part of the Student Voice Committee, and the student breakfast, the DEI breakfast, which will also be happening. So I know we have space there to talk about Unity Week, and I'll let them talk about that then. We also have a DEI breakfast that the students brought together. It took a lot of last minute planning, lots of emails this week, but there will be a DEI breakfast tomorrow morning between 8 and 9. Yeah, 7:45 and 9:30 in first and second block. And they have a speaker, Dr. Hernandez, which many of you already know. She used to be very active in our committee, and Dr. Hernandez will be the keynote speaker. And it'll be a good foundational meeting to jump ahead into the next year. It's a good springboard event. That this is all a student-driven and led initiative. We supported them, but this was their idea. They pulled it off and they brought it together. So we're very impressed with what the students have been able to do in a short amount of time.
And that starts at 7:45 tomorrow
Yes.
in the LGI.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Any questions from the subcommittees or for the subcommittees? If not, we'll roll right into DEI in action, which is kind of a continuation of all the things happening in our buildings. And Derek, I think you're probably on deck for this one too.
Yes. Leah and I have been jumping around from building to building, um, especially in the elementary schools. Leah's been at the equity team meetings, and I at Pine Bush, and they had a curriculum meeting over there as well. I've joined Westmere for their equity team meeting, and did a presentation on the pain of social exclusion and how in-group, out-group impacts identity development. In particular, we talked about race and racism in the school and how to deal with those situations at an elementary level, at the developmental level in the elementary. Um, we also presented at a Goodland Elementary School as well on that topic. Um, We also had Leah did a book tasting with the Asian Student Union Club, um, and they had an author, Raj Tawny, join them for a quick hello, and the students stayed for a Q&A there. Leah also met with other student organizations, the Feminist Club in particular, and of course we all met with the Student Voice meetings. And lastly, we put out a spring DEI newsletter that went out to faculty through the building principals, and each of the building principals shared something that was going on in their school with regards to DEI. And I had an article in the newsletter that talked about how we use an equity lens to build a whole school approach, to usually use equity as an umbrella. The whole school approach is an umbrella to talk about all of the approaches, whether it be MTSS, contextualized learning in workspaces and workplace, and all the things that were happening in our school, and how those approaches are all really whole school approaches that put students at the center, and hopefully put some ballast behind that in how it lends to DEI work. And yes, and Leah and I also participated with an equity officer from Niskayuna to host an end of the year gathering for the Global Majority Educators Affinity Group, which we've been doing through Capital Region BOCES this year. And it's been a very successful program. We had a good turnout, and we got a lot of great feedback, and it's an initiative that we believe will be reinstated next year, that they'll want to continue.
Questions for Derek on DEI in action? Derek, you had mentioned to me, so I'll just put it out there, that you and Leah are looking at doing a kind of a one-pager newsletter before the end of the school year with some ideas of books to read or articles to look at or other resources to peruse when folks have more time over the summer. So I think that'll be great.
Yeah, it'll be fun. We'll have some pictures from the programming that we have coming up that the students have done, and some highlights from the year that people may not have seen or heard of. And yes, the point of it is to give some summer resources. There's some podcasts that are coming online that will be pretty interesting for folks who want to listen, or some light summer reading for folks who are looking for something to get into for the summer.
That's great. We'll look forward to that. All right. This week is Unity Week at GHS. And I know tomorrow is a big day, but I don't know if one of our high school students want to clue us in on some of the things happening as part of Unity Week.
I can share a bit about Unity Week. So we started on Monday, and that was supposed to be like a homeroom activity, but we had like some logistics that didn't work out, and we weren't able to have the paper slips delivered to the homerooms. So that was like an activity that hopefully we can maybe like work out next year. But on Tuesday, we had an activity in the quad during lunch times for all the lunch mods, and it was called Building Bridges. It kind of like matched our themes. We were building bridges of identity, so people could write things on a piece of paper, and that could be anything relating to their identity or just positive messages in general. So anything, it could be different parts of what make them who they are, like race, religion, interests, passions, things like that. And we had a piece of construction paper, a large one, that we kind of put them together, the slips of paper, so they formed a bridge. And we had people from different lunch mods participate, and then we built that bridge, and then we used another piece of paper. So we're gonna hang those up at the anti-hate rally, which most likely will happen at the LGI because it's probably going to rain. But today was Support Your Cause Day, and then tomorrow is Wear Blue for Unity, and then we'll have the anti-hate rally in the evening.
That sounds awesome. So since we're talking about the Unity Week and the anti-hate rally, other than it likely being undercover because we're supposed to get a lot of rain, what's in the plan for the anti-hate rally in case anyone on the screen would like to swing by at 3:00?
I can share a little bit about this. So it starts officially at 2:30 and it's going to be in the LGI. And we're going to first start by having like a little icebreaker activity, and it's like I think it's called like speed dating, and basically like it's like basically like speed dating, and you just like go around, and I think I'm not sure if you ask questions or um if there's a question and you like answer, but you have like 30 seconds each and you go around, and it's just like an icebreaker activity. And then after that we'll have like rounds of speeches, club presentations. I'm pretty sure BSU has a club presentation, and March for Our Lives also has a club presentation. And then we have our privilege walk, which if you don't know, it's basically like this year we're just doing like a ribbon activity where I think this is like what we usually do every year. Like we have ribbons, and then we're like in a straight line, and then someone oh, actually it's different this year. We're doing like a disagree, agree, neutral thing where like a speaker will ask a question, and then like you move to which side, like depending on like your personal like choice and opinion and how you relate to that question. And it just like helps to show like what are some problems that are in our community, how different are we, how similar are we, stuff like that. And then we also have our pledge that we say, and then we have our ending tribute, I think. Oh, we also have our chalk activity, and I think that's going to be a little bit different this year because it's raining. We'll be doing it on paper with markers instead. But Anju, feel free to add anything that I missed.
Yeah, I think that was a good overview of everything we're doing. For club involvement, we have confirmed boots from Hindu Club, which is a new club this year, and we have Feminist Club, and we have BSU, and March for Our Lives. And like Shreya said, March for Our Lives and BSU will also be doing a presentation. And we have 6 speakers that we split into 2 rounds. So it will be 3 speakers. We will do some activities and some club presentations, and then it will be the second half of speakers.
That sounds fantastic. Do we have any middle schoolers coming up to join us? I didn't know if we were able to work that out or if it was possible.
I think they're working on getting permission slips together for that to happen. Leo was spearheading that. She's not here right now tonight, but yeah, there was some talk of being able to get students up there. I think the issue was making sure that students had transportation lined up for them to pick them up.
And then, just to reiterate, all of our DEI district level committee members, if you have time and want to come by the high school tomorrow, you're more than welcome to be a part of this, truly student-led event. The adults are really very much guides on the side and coaches, and the students are front and center in figuring out what to do and how to do it. And it's really, past years have been very meaningful and memorable. So if you can come by, bring your umbrella, but we'll be inside. Any questions from the group about Unity Week or the anti-hate rally? All right. I just have just a quick update. The board has worked through the process of reading all of the letters of interest, and we will be the board will be appointing members at the June 10th regular board meeting. I'm not sure everyone has been communicated with, so I'm not going to give the list tonight. But know that the work is done, and our new members will be joining this group for our June meeting, so they can get a feel for what it's like to be a part of this committee and meet everyone and start to become a part of the group. So that's where we are with that. Go ahead, Heather.
I was wondering, in this next, with the new members, is there more gender diversity?
That's a good question. Let me look at my sheet here, which I dropped on the floor, and I'll answer that, but I'm going to turn my camera off for a second. I think the answer is yes, Heather. I'm seeing we have some, especially among students, we have some young men who are joining our group. So I'm going to say yes. Good question. So stay tuned. I know, again, Derek and I were talking earlier in the week about maybe gathering some feedback from the members of this committee to talk about the what and the wherefore and the how of what works and what may not work so well with these particular gatherings. And do we want to think about our structure or potentially doing some in-person meetings? So between now and the end of the school year, we're going to try to get some feedback from all of you and think about how this might look a little bit different next year to make sure we have good participation and we're meeting everybody's needs. Is that fair, Derek? I know I just jumped in there. All right. All right, those are all of our kind of update topics. So I'm going to transition us to our learning component. And I just want to set the context for the article that was selected for today. I actually want to thank one of our board members, our school board members, Gloria Toll-Hilt, who came upon this article called The Rise of Brown v. Board of Education Skeptics and shared it with the Board of Education about a week and a half ago. And it really, I think, inspired a lot of thought. Now, as a school board, they didn't have the opportunity to talk about it as a group, but I know that just by following their emails, there was a lot of reading of it and like, you have to read this article kind of a discussion. So thank you, Tara, for sending it along to me. And when I read it, I thought, this would be perfect conversation for this particular group. So it sort of made its way through our many decision-making groups within the organization. So Derek's gonna, I'm hoping everyone had a chance to read it and really want to encourage everyone to jump in. We'd love to have everyone kind of give their thoughts about their impressions. And with that, Derek, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right. I hope everyone gets a chance to turn their mic on and share their thoughts. I would like to at least open up by hearing people's initial impressions of what stood out to them in the article. Obviously, it's about the rise of Brown versus Board of Education skeptics. It's clear that there's a clear thesis there that's coming out. But is there anything in that article that spoke to you about directly that you'd like to share? Heather.
I thought that it was interesting because I wasn't really sure whether the argument was, that the decision itself in this case was so much the issue as whether or not the results and the efficacy of it was really, didn't lead to the change that the decision itself everyone thought was promised. So I think that I thought it was a really provocative and interesting viewpoint. And the other, but is it about the decision itself or that the fact that it didn't change the way that it had hoped. Then the other thing is that I wasn't clear on how much momentum this particular viewpoint is gaining. And that was, whether it's like a very small voice and minority of people who are talking about this, or is this something that is really gaining traction? And if it's gaining traction, then what is the proposed solution?
Awesome. Tamika.
Yeah, you'll have to excuse my voice. I have like some type of respiratory thing with all the stuff in the air. So the article to me was very interesting, and it brought up I think the part that stood out was that it is an article calling out the positive and negatives of the decisions, right? And so the decisions, we all know in the courts, laws that are created, they're only as powerful or as meaningful as the will of the people. And if the will of the people aren't to integrate, then these decisions and these laws could be extremely detrimental. And we've seen it time and time again. I think for me, this article was extremely impactful because it spans beyond just Black people in this country. From my own experience and/or from my ancestors' experience, we see the same thing that happened with Native Americans, right, who were forced into Christian or Catholic schools and stripped of everything they loved and knew, their culture, their language, and raped, murdered, and or just completely destroyed. The same thing, when you are growing up in New York City schools back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when the wave of Puerto Ricans and, my family was coming in, you were told you could not speak your own language. You were beaten for it, right? Slapped on the hand, and or by white educators, and or even, European Hispanic educators. I frequently go back to the experience of my father, had, where he was told he speaks Spanish like a monkey by, a Spanish educator, because he spoke Puerto Rican dialect, and they weren't allowed to speak Spanish. And so all of that is it plays into the degrading will of educators, depending on their background and where they come from, regardless of what decision is made in the courts, and what it does to our children and what it does for generations to come, right? And so we see it time and time again in schools. My daughter, I could say, just graduated last week from an HBCU, Hampton University down in Virginia, but she grew up in Guilderland, and she walked out of Guilderland with such persistence. Mom, I need to get out of this school. I need to get out of this district. I don't feel like I belong. And I just wanted her to belong. I raised her here. I raised all three of my children here. But I think time and time again, where she would try to fit in, depending on the background, she just didn't feel like anyone connected with her, or the teachers, or some of the students. And even when she was trying to create activities that resonated with her, like STEP programs, none of the teachers would step in and help facilitate that or help to support that. Right. And so quite often our children are left out because they just don't understand, or there's no will behind it. And so I love the school district, and I know we're trying to do better, and we're doing better. And this is what, the DEI committee is about, as well as in other, a lot of well-intended educators across our district. But I think this is a great article to share, to bring knowledge, change wills, and also just for that general awareness, and understanding and knowing that general history, what it means and how it can make or break generations of the educated and or those that seek education in our schools.
Awesome. Thank you. Both of you gave us a lot to consider. Because when this decision was made, a lot of people felt that the Supreme Court was going outside of its mandate, meaning it was trying to make social policy, and people felt that they went too far. And there's a lot of debate about that, and there's a lot of resistance, open resistance to this ruling. And a lot of folks in Congress stepped up and said, we're not going to agree with this. As the Southern Manifesto, 101 people in Congress, senators in Congress said, we're not going to, in the House, in Congress itself, not just, said we're not going to follow this ruling. So it was very controversial in its time. And so, yeah, it brings out a lot for us to consider, especially what Heather had said about was it the decision or the outcome? I think that that's a very critical observation to make, because the decision was overturning separate but equal, and I think that's where a lot of people start, is that, but in order to do that, Thurgood Marshall focused on the separation and not the inequality. So when you look at the Supreme Court decision, the Chief Justice was saying, although all tangible factors are equal, we believe that this is, an inequitable system because of the impact. They lean largely on the Clark and Clark Doll experiments that said that there was a badge of inferiority placed upon Black students because of this separation. So it didn't acknowledge the 80 years of Jim Crow and the entrenched segregation and the unequal facilities and supplies and things, and focused on something that some people questioned in terms of how we should deal with this problem. So since it looked at that, they said we need to desegregate with all deliberate speed, which basically meant to assimilate Black children into white schools. It wasn't really integration, because a lot of the Black schools closed down. A lot of Black teachers lost their jobs, and it was really this integrationist move. And some people felt like the outcome as a result of that was devastating. It caused achievement gaps. It put students in situations where they did not, where they were not understood by the people educating them. And this opened up a whole Pandora's box of social issues that came to the fore. I see a bunch of hands, so I'm gonna shut up and move over to Heather, then Nina, and then Tara. Sorry.
I think I would just.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nina. Then Heather, then Tara. I saw that. I got the.
Sorry, Nina. I was just gonna say, I think that this is where, when people share their story about Guilderland, I think one of the things is that we celebrate diversity a lot. We talk about equity, and there's programs to address that. I think the inclusion part is often where our students struggle, and where we as a district really need to focus. Because then I think that's the part that often is the hardest to address, that inclusion piece of community, that people feel like they belong and that they're valued, and that they're, even though we talk about celebrating diversity, that their whole being is truly included and celebrated and wanted in this community. And I think that's the part that, as we move forward in wherever this committee is taking us, I think that inclusion part is part of this article, is that, like you said, it was assimilating and it wasn't including, and it wasn't, it wasn't about that. So.
Go ahead, Nina.
Yeah, so first I just want to say, Tamika, I'm sorry that your daughter experienced that. And to any family that feels that way, I'm sorry. It's definitely something that makes me grateful for this, right? As you said, Heather, I think it's something that's going to be ongoing. And I think the damage of hundreds of years is going to just continue to be something that we have to constantly conscientiously address, right? And to me, I think it's this article was very informative from the perspective of how well students do when they feel like they belong. You talk about Howard University and places like that where students do excel. Even the Tuskegee Institute by Booker T. Washington, trying to found that for African Americans early on in the 19th century, understanding that the capacity for African Americans to excel is something that needs to be validated within their own community. I think those are ideas that we need to continue to realize that those are instrumental in success within communities. I also think to that extent, like that's such a valid point that those areas are still in fact true. In terms of how the decision didn't end up where it had hoped to be, so much of that, to your point, Derek, the history that followed from Little Rock, Arkansas to Swan trying to desegregate schools by busing, and even the Kerner Commission trying to investigate why there was riots happening, even though there was integration, and segregation at that point was even outlawed after 1964. The Kerner Commission discovered that it was economic inequalities that continued to be the issue. So to your point, it's how race and socioeconomic inequalities continue to be unfortunately intertwined, and how to go about allowing people to have choice. So I think for me, the piece that the article doesn't touch on is that we have to remember that when we look at Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP, their frustration was that African Americans didn't have the choice to go where they wanted to go. And that stemmed from Plessy versus Ferguson and even earlier. And, the earlier civil rights cases in the 19th century that tried to uphold the fact that African Americans were being forced to go where they were supposed to go or told to go by societal and, legal, rules that were in place. And I think we have to look at this as different compartments, right? So looking at it from the perspective of our lens in 2025, when we understand how there's the socioeconomic factors, how unfortunately by de facto segregation that's occurred in cities, it's caused the diminishing of funding in those schools. So I think we have to look at how do we allow for the fact that there needs to be the element of choice, that discrimination preventing African Americans from going where African Americans wanted to go, rather than being forced to attend certain schools. That to me was the point that was, in my opinion, overlooked in the article. But how do we allow for the choice and at the same time allow for the equity of the funding? Because by forcing integration, it's 100% accurate. That doesn't solve the problem that exists. However, choice is something that needed to be corrected when there was discriminatory segregationist laws.
Tara. Uh-oh. Oh, okay. I think Tara, did you put your hand down? I just see she.
Nope, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I put my hand down and then I didn't unmute myself.
Oh, okay.
So I went to kindergarten September 1968, and we had busing on Long Island where I grew up. We had black neighborhoods, white neighborhoods. So that's when they just started busing kids from the black neighborhoods to go into the white neighborhoods. Some of the white kids went to black neighborhoods, and it was a mess. It was a total mess. And I remember my first day of kindergarten, there being like a lot of police at the school. And we were thinking, we got scared. And the bus driver's like, no, it's the first day of kindergarten. They're so excited to see you get into school. That's why the police are here to say good job. And he was so nice. And then I realized later it was because they were afraid of, rioting or something. So there was definitely a police presence. And of course, all the police were white. So that just kind of made things even worse. But it wasn't until I was in high school that I realized oh my gosh, wow. It just really impacted me. And reading this article made me think about that. And just something that Clarence Thomas said about how it never ceases to amaze me that the courts are so willing to assume that anything that is predominantly Black must be inferior. And, you know, the whole idea of taking Black children out of those schools and putting them with white children, and like you mentioned, Derek, about Black teachers losing their jobs. And Thomas also said that Black schools can function as the center and symbol of Black communities and provide examples of independent Black leadership, success, and achievement. And I never thought of that. Like, I never knew about how these predominantly Black schools were then shut down and closed down, and these teachers lost their jobs because, yeah, you want to include, you know, integrate with the kids, but then teachers, what happened to those Black teachers? Why, you know, where did they go? And that's what I kept thinking. It's like, what happened to them? What happened to these Black communities that had these schools in them? It's just this has just got me, like, I have a whole list of books that I'm going to read now based on this article, and I appreciate that. But it just really kind of like opened up this whole thinking that I never knew before. I never knew the history, the complete history of the Brown decision.
Awesome. Thank you. Shaka.
Hi, everyone. Tara and everyone else, thank you for that comment. I did read the article and actually have been talking about it quite a bit with my husband and reflecting on it. And I quite honestly don't know where I stand on it now that I think about it. Now that I think about it, like, I see the pros and cons of it all, you know, and just over the last few years of different things that I've learned that I never knew about, you know, like Black Wall Street and, you know, various things, like these things that we weren't taught, you know, and how there were these communities that were bustling and thriving that, you know, were taken away, and communities and culture. And, you know, when I think about this article, I think about separate but equal, you know, like, sure, you can come, but you're not really equal. You know, what ended up happening with part of, you know, some of the integration, as I've seen through my career, is, you know, just exclusionary disciplinary practices. And, you know, just looking at, you know, the fact that Black boys have the highest expulsion rate, and children as little as infants are being expelled from daycares and preschools. And why is that? Because the fact is, sure, you know, Brown versus Board of Education came along and we said, this is great and we should be able to go anywhere, but it doesn't mean that we accept you. It doesn't mean that you're going to be included in this community. And I think just over the years, you know, as referenced by, you know, Tamika, you know, mentioning how her daughter felt in school, it's nothing that anybody on here has done. It's just something that's always been. And, you know, it's an undertone that, you know, nobody really wants to talk about. That tension that's around, you know, when it comes to race. We'll talk about any other issue, you know, we will talk about LGBTQ, we will talk about anything else but race and what that has done and the damage that it has caused in not just my community, but various communities, you know, around. So if I think Derek and I and Marie and Maria the other day were talking about this, like, nothing's changing. We're not going backwards. This needs to happen, right? But how do we have our children going forward? I have a fourth grader. How do I, you know, going forward, that she's not going to be like Tamika's daughter saying, I don't feel like I belong here. She loves Guilderland. I love Guilderland. She loves her school, you know, and I want to see her be successful and all the other kids in Guilderland, you know, be successful and feel like they belong and get the best education that they can possibly get, you know, from us, from our educators, from the parents, from the community. So I really don't know how I feel like I'm in the middle, with the article. I I wonder how things would be had we not integrated, and would we have stronger, more confident, you know, children who, knew who they were, knew where they came from, and, had those old school ideals, and I just wonder, but I'm saying I love it here. So I'm not going back. So that's my comment.
I think it's important to note that nowhere in the decision did they ever say to integrate. I think that a lot of times we conflate that term desegregation with integration, and it gives us a false awareness of what was going on. If you look at the mentor of Thurgood Marshall, that was Charles Houston, and his legal strategy prior to Thurgood Marshall was trying to focus on the unequal part, and his focusing on an unequal part, on the unequal institutions, was to force either separate but equal to become equal. Like, if we can't get into Harvard, build us a Harvard. And if you're not willing to do that, or if that is impossible, because Harvard has existed since 1600 and has a head start on any institution that could start of equal quality at that time, then you're going to have to integrate and let us into these institutions. So that legal strategy was not working. It was starting, they couldn't win. So when Thurgood Marshall switched his legal tactic to focusing on the separate piece, he said, this is a winning legal argument. Now, when he made a winning legal argument, the only problem is the sacrifice, the price that was paid, because the price that was paid is that he had to admit that everything was equal, which was a falsehood. And he had to focus on the reason that the separation is putting a badge of inferiority on the Black students, and that is unfair and not good. So when they use those doll experiments and to speak to this, it set up this notion that you need to desegregate. You don't need to integrate, you need to desegregate. You need to assimilate these poor Black children into white schools because they've been separated from white kids and made to feel inferior. So now you need to put them in there. So that set up this whole notion of enrichment programs and this whole notion that we don't need to integrate. Otherwise, we'd be busing white kids to Black schools and we'd be integrating them into the Black schools and sharing the bed. That wasn't what happened. What happened is that you took 9 Black children and put them into a predominantly white school and said it was integrated. That's not integration. What you did was desegregate that school. And after 10 years of desegregation at all deliberate speed, which is what the Supreme Court stated, they find not a whole lot had changed. And a whole lot hadn't changed because we had 80 years of a dual system of segregation, of what Nina had mentioned before, de jure by custom, and by law, and de facto by custom, through racial covenants and redlining and all of these different systems in place, that even if you wanted to integrate the schools physically, you had to come up with busing. So in the 60s, here comes another Supreme Court case, which is Alexander and Holmes, and they say, no, you have to segregate, that you must end segregation at once. Again, stop the dual system. It didn't say integrate, it just said end segregation. So that the notion that we've tried integration, I think, is a false argument, because it hasn't been tried. But what is happening is, since we've had such negative results through this assimilationist thrust that we've had, people are now starting to retreat. And that's where we get problems that are existing in our communities that speak to what Tamika and Nina had spoken about. One of the things that they quoted, the author quoted in the book, was, again and again, she heard Black parents say that trauma the trauma their children experience in predominantly white schools and from white teachers was sometimes more harmful than the undereducation occurring in segregated schools. So professionals who are looking to integrate into society want their kids to have better choices, so they move to predominantly white environments where there's better educational choices, and now they're worried about the harm that can come to their children within those. And as a professional in the Albany area, me and my wife had that conversation. Do we want our kids in these urban environments in Troy and Schenectady? And or my wife was like, absolutely not. I went through Schenectady schools. My child is not going there. I rather have them have better opportunities in these things. And then you have to deal with some of the traumatizing experiences or trying to fit in. And you can use race as the proxy for this conversation, but you can look at other marginalized groups. And I've spoken to even some Jewish students here in the school. I was asking, where's the Jewish student organization that's in school? And some of the students said, we don't feel safe enough to express ourselves in that way at this point in time. So we find more safety and security in our synagogues and in places where we're safe. So people who have that opportunity have said, you know what, I don't feel safe, so I'm retreating. So there are people who are retreating and some people who are saying, no, we're in this tension, this tense place where where inclusion or integration being faithfully tried. I think that's where we're pushing as a DEI committee is on the line. And there's a tension there that we might not be getting the results that we want. And how committed are we at this point in time in history to creating that environment? Because there are some that say, yeah, I'm interested, but I really not interested in hearing from this group of marginalized people or acknowledging these people's stories. And it's hard to do both at the same time. And that's our dilemma that we're faced with. And even as a Guilderland community is making sure, Marie says it all the time, that each and every student, she always says each and every student is included at our school, feels valued and seen. Like, how do we keep that aspiration at the center of what we're doing? Nina.
I'm happy to give my turn to Anju because I already spoke. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. I just want to share my thoughts on the article, and what I really got from it was that lived experience matters when you're considering policy, not just theory, because there's real struggles of Black families who felt that integration did not deliver on the promises that were made. And I think whenever we consider any policy made, we have to consider the unintended consequences. And as it was brought up before, there were thriving Black educational institutions, and there's Black educators who lost their jobs. There was these cultural spaces that were dismantled. There was communities that were displaced, and there was Black students who went into a more hostile environment. So I think as we move forward, we need to think about education in terms of the quality of education rather than just focusing on policy, and also focusing on representation in the classroom and focus on building a more equitable curriculum and also community.
Thank you. I'm just writing down some notes. Shaka.
That was fabulous, Anju. I love that. Derek, you hit what I was thinking on the head as far as the trauma piece. I think that's one piece that we're, as a committee in the future, really, and thinking about the climate survey data and the like, is something that we might need to focus on. I think very few of us can say that we were more of an inspiration to someone than their own parent is. So, it's very important to, you know, parents know their kids and they know their experience through the school system, and that's going to rub off on how they feel, you know, whether it's a valid fear or not. It's going to rub off on how they feel their children are being treated in school. It's going to, you know, go back to lived experience, you know, and history and what that parent has gone through. So, you know, that may be something that needs to be thought about down the line. You know, how do we engage caregivers and really, you know, because I've always heard as a parent, like, you're one of the most important people here at this table. You need to be here. And how do you bridge that gap and build that trust and relationship so that, you know, our kids feel comfortable enough to say when they're not getting what they need, you know? So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Tara.
Oh God, my head is like all over the place right now. I do agree with the Brown decision, so I want to make that clear. But what I guess I didn't know was the impact that it had on Black communities and Black schools. And why did those children have to leave those schools? Why couldn't they have just stayed where they were and maybe got more support from the state or whatever? So those are like my questions, and everything Anju said, I totally agree with. I wish I could speak as well as she does. But it's so true. Lived experiences matter so much. And I think just by reading these articles and learning all these things, I mean, there's like an uncomfortable feeling that I'm having because these are things I feel like I should have known, but I don't. And now I do. And now I'm trying to think, okay, so what do I do with this now? And how can we help our kids in Gildan, like Tamika's daughter? You know, how do we, or the Jewish student you were mentioning, Derek, like, how do we help those kids feel comfortable in this setting? And what can we do as a community to bring people together so that they're not having, I don't want anybody to have trauma, you know, I don't want anyone to feel inferior. I want people to feel like they belong. So I think it's just got me thinking a lot.
Excellent. Thank you. Tamika.
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind, and this is where I was saying, like, there are certain things that we should be doing as a school district to help to, like you said, really integrate all students that we welcome in Guilderland, right? And so one thing is to start having those conversations with HBCUs or you know, even the Jewish community. Some of the things that I always notice is that a lot of our parents do a lot of talking. You know, we have a predominantly white population, and they're really good at doing the talking, advocating for their kids. But sometimes, quite often, and I can attest to this, you know, parents of color, we come into these communities and we walk with our head down, and we just are thankful that we're here, and we just do our best to assimilate, right? And that's not the best thing for our children. We want to fit in, we want to belong, we have a safe space, we want to build community. But how do we advocate for our children? I can tell you, by sending my daughter to the HBCU was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life for her, and one that she quite frankly made for herself, and got accepted. But when I tell you the predominant figures that walk the halls of Hampton University, Rosa Parks, she worked there. Martin Luther King preached there. Booker T. Washington was an alumni. Like, there are so many amazing individuals that actually went, walked, and or taught at those schools. As far as the speaker was concerned, we had the Honorable Don L. Scott. And I can tell you, I was impressed, in awe, but I didn't think my other two children even knew who that was, right? The first Black Speaker of the House. And you have these institutions that have all of this great history. They've individuals that they're exposed to. I remember her second year, she woke up early and she was like, "Oh, snipers are on the roof. Kamala's coming to campus." And yes, we're the first stop. Howard's next, because Hampton is just that predominant in, the Black, amongst Black institutions. And I'm like, what? And then, it was just an amazing experience, but she wouldn't have had that otherwise, right? And so starting as a community that wants to integrate, right, that wants to accept and wants to honor, start having those roundtable discussions with these institutions that do exist, that have done it right for decades, and that have embraced not just Black students, but all students. When I was at the graduation ceremony, I saw all shades. There weren't just Black students there, predominantly Black students, yes. But my daughter made friends from so many other countries. People were, she met classmates that were Italian, Jewish. They came from all over. And I'm like, she said, yeah, there's a language barrier between me and my friend, but he's from Italy, but we're making it work because I'm learning Italian. And I'm like, this is amazing, right? But they've done it, and they've done it so well, and they've done it right for centuries. And these are the institutions that stand with excellence. And that is what they do. Like, they stand on excellence because they are, because they do accept and respect everyone. And so that's one idea. And when you start having those discussions, you start to, and I think I brought this up in the past, where I think all my kids had to do this and they come home frustrated. But during Black History Month, it's like the same music choices. And I know Guilderland is big on music, but immediately they start to collaborate and teach the kids songs about Black trauma instead of Black history, right? Wade in the Water, slave songs. And that's not okay, right? Because of the many contributions that African Americans or people of color have had in the music business. It'll blow your mind, right? Everyone knows this, but that's not what they focus on. Those aren't the pieces that they're learning. My daughter quit the violin because everything was classical, but then I took her to the Black violinist concert. How many of you have ever even heard of the Black violinists? They are just, if you ever even Google them, they're amazing. And what they can do with that instrument blows your mind. And that's what they should be learning. And I encouraged her to bring the playbook to the teacher. Bring it. See if you can learn some of those pieces, because that was just something that you're not exposed to, but you should be. All of our students should be exposed to all of our contributions and not just some. And so that's all I have to say. And but that's where you could start, again, is to really start having those discussions with those institutions that are doing it correctly, and learning from them. If there aren't enough parents and or advocates to speak up and or to give advice in the first place.
Thank you. Nina.
Oh my goodness, that was so wonderful. That was such a wonderful thing to hear. And I want to say that the people that you mentioned, right, that have visited the school that your daughter has been in, similar to what Anju was saying, never would have expected the outcome of the decision to be the way it was. And yet they fought so tirelessly for ending segregation. So I think for me, I think the question is, and I love looking at the way to address it. I like the idea of having the discussions and bringing people together and leaders that can represent different groups for all of the different groups in the school. I think that's a big part of it. Like your daughter seeing African-American violinists, right? It's a role model for her, and kids need role models that they can connect with on those levels to see where they belong. And I think for me, I feel that, right, like what Anju said, this policy that was made, I just think the country didn't know how to handle it. Even the presidents who were forced to enforce it were not enthusiastic about it. And then the continued efforts of these poor kids who would have to go into these buildings and these schools at the university level and the secondary level were met with that resistance. So it just showed that our country wasn't ready for the decision. I don't know if it's so much the decision was wrong or that the country didn't know how to handle it, and that the country didn't know how to properly implement it. Those poor teachers who lost their jobs if we were a different place now, we would have possibly handled it differently. Maybe not. I don't know. I think that the racism is so inherent in this country that there's no way it would have just been gone, right? It unfortunately carried itself into different ways. It found new avenues for these poor kids to then become in this inferiority position because of how we handled the decision. So the fact that DEI committees are working to do the work, I think that, the one beauty of Guilderland is the diversity. As you know, I can also sympathize with the concerns that are the areas where people can be frustrated. But at the same time, I do think our diversity is something that, we are proud of, and learning how to handle it in the way that makes us stronger. And the ideas that people on the committee tonight have raised are amazing. It means that the potential is there to be able to help our kids feel like they belong. And I think that this article was great in opening our eyes to where the decision did not follow through with the expectation. So thank you.
Definitely. Just to put a number on those who lost their jobs, so people knew. In 1972, the National Education Administration did a study, and they found that over 30,000 African-American teachers lost their job between 1964 and 1972. So there was a huge swath of folks. And I think inherently what we were struggling with is the ability to see each other as equals, to see each other as fellow human beings, to share with each other. I think the irony of the decision in 1954/57, depending on the second part two of that, is that the Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. The reason the South had a public education system is due to the Reconstruction, due to African American politicians who came into office during the Reconstruction and built it. It didn't exist prior to that point. So the people who constructed the public education system in the South were then summarily kicked out of it, after the Reconstruction, and had to fight for over 70 something years to gain access to it. And when they did, there was strong resistance. And it was, Mississippi went private. They shut down their public school system for 5 years. So did Virginia, so that people had time to develop private schools. And there goes the resources falling away from these schools and into other places. But again, people were not upset because the quality of education was lesser at the Black schools. They were upset because the facilities and the supplies were. In fact, the majority of Afro-American educators during that time had master's degrees, which was unheard of at the time. So the quality of instruction in the education was solid. But that ended up becoming severely truncated with the assimilationist ethos that came out of that 1954 decision. So there were pluses and minuses. A lot of it was carrying along the specter of racism, the specter of this inequality, the specter that Black people could not have produced anything of quality, and that they were inferior to a superior system because they had a dual system. So those struggles are still there, and people still look down on these educational experiences because, one, the devaluation of urban education, the defunding of it, left a lot of our urban educational centers struggling, and people moving their money to either private schools or suburban areas. And, that has left some inequalities. But in places where folks were able to hold on to their resources, they were able to still create excellent systems. The HBCUs are part of that. For a person who's been in the STEM field, I worked at the College of New Jersey, which is considered a near Ivy in New Jersey. And when they were looking at students in their engineering program, they're like, why aren't Black students persisting? And they were looking at SAT scores, they're looking at report cards. And what we found, I said, well, let's look at where the students of color who are getting doctorates in the STEM field, where are they coming from? They were coming from the top 5 institutions were all HBCUs. And when we looked at their admissions records, their academic credentials were lower than that of TC&J's to get in, the students at TC&J to get into that program. So the question wasn't one of ability, the question was one of atmosphere. And what are they doing that's different, that's cultivating these students? We didn't say, hey, let's look at what these other schools are doing and how they're being successful. We just said it's easier to look at the inferiority of these students and that they're not ready and there must be something wrong with them. They can't cut it in this environment. So we're constantly having to deal with these social issues to say, how do we create inclusive environments where everyone is seen, respected, and truly heard? And that's our ongoing mission. That's our ongoing challenge, that anyone who's not in the in-group, in the mainstream, whoever they are, any marginalized person has to overcome this barrier to be seen as an equal, to be able to move forward. And it is exhausting, but it is something that these marginalized groups and people in our community are dealing with on a daily basis. And a lot of them, like Tamika said, are just trying to fit in. And when anything that speaks to them not fitting in, they don't want to deal with. I can't tell you how many young people I've dealt with in my short time here who said, this happened, but I just want it to go away. I just want it to fit in. Please don't make a big deal out of this because I don't want to be seen as different. And so these are things that we have to continue to work with, because we have to truly try integration. Anju.
I brought up earlier that about how I believe we need to make more like an equitable curriculum. So I just want to like share my experience, maybe like going through high school and learning about Brown versus Board of Education. I feel like to me it was kind of presented with like one singular narrative, and I feel like it was kind of seen as an unquestioned triumph, and we kind of learned about what followed after that, but we never really considered the nuanced perspectives of people who had to like live through this and who went through this. And I think there should have been more acknowledgement about the costs that came with this decision. And I really think that we learn through like discussions and engaging with others. So I would love to see more like discussion based classroom involvement, considering different perspectives in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Anju. Like you said, lived experiences, that is one of the keys to really understanding this, is how our students are experiencing what they're seeing. And they're literally telling us what they need. And thank you for that. Heather.
Yeah, I think that was really great. And I wonder, as the curriculum changes and the regents may or may not be a thing, whether that the curriculum can change so that we can have those discussions and not focus on testing and the scores so much at the end of the year and cramming all of that knowledge that you have to memorize for a single test, because I think that is one huge deterrent in having these really meaningful discussions and developing a curriculum that can really foster that.
Excellent point. Annika.
Whenever we're doing work on hard topics, for example, in like social studies, and currently we're learning about the Holocaust, I feel like most of the curriculum and some of the teachers more focus on reading from textbooks and packets. And yes, we talk about it, but I feel like we don't discuss enough. And I wish that we would discuss with our classmates and the teachers, because we can't be as curious as we hope. Like I hope, like other people can be, because I have so many questions that I would want to ask, but I can't ask because we're working on a packet, or we're worried about a score we're going to get, or we're told to be quiet and just focus. So I hope in the future, and maybe through changes in the curriculum, we can open up to more discussions on different topics.
Excellent. Thank you. I see all the acknowledgement coming up. You can see it exploding on the side of your screen. Um, I think everybody's brought up some awesome points tonight. And I'm glad that we took time to look at this article. This was part of, I'm an Africana Studies major and I taught it for 20 years. So this is like near and dear to my heart. I always have to withhold myself from like going down that road because there is so much information that I find that people don't know. When I taught Africana Studies at in higher ed, the one thing I would get was the wide-eyed view from the students is I've never heard this before. And so now they're like, either my education I've gotten the last 18 years is wrong, or you're engaged in a fantasy. Like, you got to show me how this is true. Like there was this like this can't, nobody could have kept this from me for this long. Like there was an initial disbelief that the students had to get over before they have to get in and read and look at the historical record and analyze it for themselves. A lot of people have not read primary source material, which drives me nuts as an educator. But a lot of the history we don't tell. The narrative usually has one point of view, and I think our students are pointing that out, that there are multiple points of view, and our society is showing that we have difficulty accepting alternative points of view or different points of view, but we need to consider the continuum of thought on any issue, even the ones that make us uncomfortable, so that we can really understand what is motivating the behavior of people in our community, and how do we figure out how to negotiate that, because these are real issues and problems. And sometimes it's not as important to be right as it is to be aware of our relationship, to try and understand before we try to be right. It's important to have an understanding or an open mind or an open heart to hear what other people have to say. When the conversation is shut down, people tend to look for information wherever they can get it. And now you got people doing their own independent studies without support and finding out all types of material, because there's a lot of, now we got information overload in our society, and there's a lot of not so healthy information out there. And now with the addition of AI is only as reliable as your education, the level that you understand and can parse that information that it's compiling. So those things are still necessary and needed. So our educators are needed. And I think sometimes, as Heather brought up, and I'm sure some of our other educators can attest to, that sometimes outside factors and stakeholders and test taking and APPR scores and all the things that have plagued education in the last decade or so have been moving us in a different direction from what I like to say, sometimes school gets in the way of our education, that we're doing so many things to accommodate schooling that we don't get to educate in the way that we should, to prepare our young people for what's coming next. And so we got a lot of challenges before us. And the only way that we can really make a dent is to open these conversations up and sort of model for people that they're okay. I think a lot of folks are worried about being canceled. They're worried about being called racist. I've been at the elementary school just talking on that level. So it's from the elementary school on up that people feel like, oh, this is a chilly atmosphere if I broach these subjects. I may get in trouble, so I'm just gonna stick with the packet or stick with the text and leave it alone. So there's our teachers need protecting as well, so that they can do their job and get the resources that they need to do this. I know Leah, if she was on the call, she spends a lot of time gathering resources for teachers, because they don't always have the time to go looking for things to add to the curriculum and choices. So we're fighting the good fight. We have a lot of strong stakeholders. We have parents here who are bringing their stories to the table. We have teachers here who are really doing innovative things in the classroom. You know, all these pockets are equity committees, and all the buildings are really striving to push us forward. So we're fighting the good fight, but you know, history is filled of, I always say, progress and regress. So we want to keep collectively moving forward in a positive fashion. So the work that we do here is important. I think this article underscores that, and that your presence on this committee and in doing this work, even though sometimes it looks like we're moving an inch down the field at a time, or sometimes we're running in circles because we don't seem to be able to hit our stride in terms of putting a dent in these huge issues that can seem overwhelming. Your role on this committee is so important to the livelihood of our students. We've heard from our students tonight, and I think it's important to take into account what they're saying when you get a little bit tired or you feel like this is not going the way we need to, that we need to retool and come back the next year and say, how can we dig a little deeper into this? How can we have conversations where we can get to the root of this? Because all of our folks need these conversations at all ages, but our young people are telling us exactly this is what we need in our schools.
That's well put, Derek. I'm just looking at the clock and wanting to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time.
Yes, it is 8:28.
Yep, I know. A couple things I wanted to say before we wrap up, because there was a lot of discussion of HBCUs tonight. And Capital Region BOCES in the fall is putting together a bus trip for students in our region for a college fair. It's going to take place in New York City, and it's going to be a bus ride down. And then just like we do our college fairs in our own gymnasiums, but this will be all HBCUs. So kids will be able to take the bus down, hear from a lot of different schools, and then come back up, and they'll fill as many buses as there is interest. So I wanted to plant that seed with this group. Derek, I'm sure you're going to be in the loop on that because it's the district regional equity committee that is doing it.
Yes.
So I just wanted to get that out there before we wrapped up. And the only other thing I want to say was I'm so delighted about how this article kind of inspired everybody. We had great participation and commentary tonight, and that's really what we want to do with the learning component, is to get everybody's voice out there. So great job, everybody. All right, with seconds to spare, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn for tonight. Heather, thank you. Oh, wait, you have a, go ahead, Heather.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
I think we need to approve the minutes from last meeting, unless I'm wrong.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to get fired as the facilitator of this meeting. So can I take that as a motion to approve the minutes from last time? How about a second? Nina? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. I will do better next time. Actually, I'm going to have someone else facilitate. All right. Now I'll take that motion to adjourn. All right, Shaka. And thanks, Anise. All right. Great job, everybody. Thank you, Derek, for leading our discussion. Have a great night, everybody.
Have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.